to GONKCAST, a long-form discussion podcast about the music of English electronic duo Autechre, album by album, EP by EP. I'm Gabe.
I'm Dan.
And this is another episode in our AE Revisited series, seeing how our feelings have changed about various Autechre releases, but also searching for illuminating precursors to Autechre's current work on the 2022 Dash project, this time in the 1997 EP, Envane. Before we dive in, don't forget that we've launched a Patreon where for just $5 a month, you'll get bi-weekly bonus episodes on AE adjacent music, plus the opportunity to vote on future bonus episode topics. Last week, for example, the patrons decided we should do an episode on Tim Hecker's 2013 LP, Virgins. It was fun, wasn't it, Dan?
Oh yeah, it always is.
Yeah, we got a nice write-in about that, actually, which I'll get to in a minute. But head over to patreon.com/GONKCAST and join us. Shout out, by the way, to our newest patrons, Truffle, Nix, and Joshua. For our next bonus episode coming next week, the patrons have spoken. They have chosen Pansonic's Colma from 1997. There'll be a nice little 1997 synergy, I think, with this episode and that one. So look out for that and send us your thoughts about Pansonic's Colma at gonkcastpod@gmail.com. For our next main episode, free for everybody as always, we're going to revisit Autechre's 2013 LP, XI, the almighty XI. Revisit it for yourself and tell us what you think. Again, that's gonkcastpod@gmail.com. All right. Like to start things off with some corrections, leftovers, news if there is any, and this week there happens to be a little news. So over on Mastodon, that seems to be where 99% of the news comes from, Sean Booth shared some fascinating insights into his process preparing 2022 Dash soundboards for release. He's working on that next batch. For example, he said he considers the tracks mixed at the recording stage, and what he's doing, quote, more like tidying up than mastering. He also said he does this part by himself because it gets, quote, messy/inconsistent with both of us doing them. When asked, what's the difference between mastering and tidying up? He said it's mostly stuff no one would notice without null testing, then added this interesting comment. We consider the gigs to be a stage in making these releases rather than the end goal. When asked what the hell Rob's doing right now, then he said, I was a fair bit ahead of what we played so far, so he's probably filling in some of those bits. Also very interesting. Finally, when asked which sets are making the cut, he said, my rough memory is that some of the later ones were better, so I might just cut it back based on that. But so far, all of them have been decent. Just depends if the later ones are loads better, if you know what I mean. That could swing it, because there's a lot of them, and I don't know if some might become redundant in the face of better ones. Might just do all of them anyway, though. For what it's worth, there have been no definite no ones yet. So what do you think about all that, Dan?
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks like we've at least got a chance to get all of them, which I think is the, like he said, unless like it's real bad or something, like just release them all. So whoever went to those shows would like to hear them. So
yeah. Now, what do you make of this? I mean, I just find this so interesting, right? Like this idea of first him saying that we consider the gigs to be a stage in making these releases rather than the end goal. That's very interesting on a philosophical level, right? I mean, that means these aren't just documentations of an event or like a moment in time or something, right?
Yeah, like it's just, I mean, I guess it's the same as like, where you record something in the studio and then you tidy it up or whatever after. So, maybe that goes with what he was saying before about like, what's the difference in a studio album made on a bus or, in an actual studio.
It's so weird that he was like, he basically really downplayed what he's doing. He's like, I'm barely even doing anything. And yet we consider that just a stage in a longer process. It almost seems like to contradict itself.
A little bit. I mean, maybe he means like the whole package, the art, because he has mentioned that, a couple times in the past when he's talked about, doing this batch and everything. So like maybe that's what he means.
I don't know. I just find that so curious. The other thing, of course, I find equally curious is where he says, I was a fair bit ahead of what we played so far. So he's probably filling in some of those bits. Does that mean that they're kind of like working separately and how could Sean be farther ahead and like Rob's parts are just missing? Like what is that? What could that mean? Like, sometimes people have a theory that like one of them does percussion, the other does, that might make sense, some division there, but what's going on with that?
I don't like the first time I read that, I took it to mean like in listening back to them, like Sean was ahead, so go with Sean's, but I don't really know what he means, so that's probably wrong.
I kind of interpret it like on the actual production side, like when they were playing the shows they were playing, it's as if Sean was way past that, but Rob was still like more recently working on that stuff. And now while Sean is mastering, Rob is like filling in something that's missing from, but I just can't even like fathom how that could be working, what that process could mean.
Yeah, like adding to the recordings that were already made.
No. I think it's got to be new stuff, right? It's got to be like the next sets.
Oh, okay.
That's what I'm imagining.
Yeah.
Somehow Sean has filled out some kind of skeleton or something, and then Rob has some job. Clearly, they know what this is, but we don't. To like add something to what's already laid down. I
mean, maybe it's not like equally devised. Like you do the percussion, you do the melody. Maybe it's just like, this is what I've made so far. What do you want to add?
Yeah, is there anything you want to add or something?
Yeah,
like
which
that?
could be anything. I don't know.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. All right. On the sort of playing catch up leftovers side of things, we got this message from listener Tyler, who wrote in about our bonus episode I mentioned earlier on Tim Hecker's Virgins. And I just really like this message. He said, the descriptor I always have for this album is crystalline. Everything about the sound is shimmery, sharp, and jagged like a crystal. Since you guys pointed out the Steve Reich comparison, I thought I'd mention that the meta/preview-like quality of Prism reminds me a lot of Pulses from Music for 18 Musicians. Side note, I had to mention, I was listening back to my to our episode. I realized I kept saying Music for 12 Musicians, and
budget cuts.
I was combining it with, I always mix it. I actually do this all the time with Philip Glass's Music in 12 Parts. So I'm not a total idiot. But anyway, Tyler continues, the tracks aren't themselves very similar, but they both have the effect of showing you the palette and priming you for what's coming. Whenever I listen to the album, part of the in the room quality is the way the sounds almost force you to contemplate the acoustics of this impossible room. The sound is so grandiose, so reflective, and so somber that I can't help but think of the room as a cathedral. At the moments when it sounds real, I pictured the group performing in some huge abandoned cathedral. I think Hecker might have actually done this for another album, if I recall correctly. I think you're right that that was kind of the process for Rave Death, was actually being in a cathedral, and again focusing a little bit on the room. But I just really like what Tyler said here about the acoustics of this impossible room, because indeed him, like, kind of, as we talked about, right, like mixing live recorded stuff and then post-processed stuff, it makes this kind of uncanny weird quality. But it got me thinking, like the way he phrased that, it kind of clicked something in my mind, which is one major difference between Autechre and Tim Hecker, at least on the Virgins project, right, is, Autechre are more interested in like creating impossible objects, and Tim Hecker is more interested in creating impossible spaces or impossible rooms. You wouldn't think that would make such a huge difference, but it does, right?
Yeah. I think we talked a little bit about that during the episode, but yeah, it's a interesting distinction.
It's funny too, because I was thinking, we kept talking about the fact that Tim Hecker's Virgins was like a big inspiration on us when we had our kind of like experimental drone noise band back in the day. And I was thinking, we were much more like on the wavelength of creating impossible spaces or impossible rooms. But I realized that might be because you have to be goddamn brilliant to create impossible objects. You know what I mean? Anybody could do the other one, but you have to be Autechre to do that approach.
Yeah, exactly. It's much easier to do the room way.
All right. Well, that's all the catch-up stuff. We were ready to dive into Envane?
Yeah, let's do it. A little bit of background, we decided to revisit the Envane EP because its opening track, Gauze Quarter, might be the closest AE have come to doing straight hip-hop, at least until Set B of 2022 Dash, which might come even closer. It's also been a long time since we talked about this one. It was only our fourth episode, which was also covering Chiastic Slide and Sickly Sweet, so we spent about 15 minutes total on Envane, and Envane, of course, deserves its own episode.
Yeah, I thought it would be actually, honestly, very fun to do a whole episode on an EP. But Anyway, more background. Envane was released on January 27th, 1997, about a month before Chiastic Slide, and it apparently started as a kind of remix EP for the Chiastic Slide closing track, Envane. I guess, sometimes U and V can be interchangeable, in which case it would be pronounced Envane. Though this is not exactly confirmed. Back in 1997, and I'm quoting AE Pages now, Sean explained that all of the tracks started off from the same basis. However, over the course of their development, each track became more and more distinct until they were left completely unrecognizable from each other. However, when asked if that starting point was Envane in a later Ask Autechre Anything, Sean replied, quote, "It's like slightly true." And Rob replied, "They were done super close periods, same studio, gears, tastes, not a reworking of the same one track, no. But it's really the naming characteristic that they have most in common."
In another Ask Autechre Anything that occurred since our first episode on this release, Sean reflected on 1997, saying, "It was a good period for us because we felt like we had a lot more freedom from 95 onwards. We'd proved ourselves commercially to Warp, and we'd signed our deal with them in 96, so I guess that would be the main thing, really."
Yeah, so to kind of kick things off, if you can remember, I mean, it really was a long time ago. I was shocked to see how early we did this one in our, first run of the podcast. But what were like your initial feelings back then about Envane before we revisited for this episode?
Yeah, I totally don't remember what I said on the podcast before, but I've always appreciated Envane. I really like Chiastic Slide and sort of that period. So Envane is like always been, it being shorter and everything. It's like a Autechre thing I'll throw on, in the middle of the day or something, when I don't have 4 hours to dedicate to something. So I've always enjoyed it. I don't know if it's like ever been, a top tier thing or whatnot, but I've definitely always thought it was, one of the better EPs.
Yeah, I think I probably haven't given it its due, to be honest, because I sort of think of it as like a bit of an oddball, like an outlier, It feels like, and this is how I felt very much when we were doing the podcast, right, was they were getting just weirder and weirder, like in a way that was absolutely, delighting me, of course, around this time. And you have this kind of offshoot of what I view as like a very accessible, kind of fun EP, you know what I mean? It's like, it's quite like, I don't know. I think this would hook anybody. In fact, I was listening a lot this past weekend. My wife, who of course hates Autechre, she was like, "This is good. What is this?" And I was like, "It's Autechre." And she was shocked. She was like,
Tricked.
"Why didn't they play this shit at the show that we went to?" Honestly, it's funny because I bet there are a lot of old school fans that maybe feel something like the same way. But anyway, I mean, I it hasn't fit in my head in like Autechre's trajectory exactly. It's felt like some kind of little thing they did off on the side. I think maybe I've changed my mind about that this week, but do you get what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it does feel like a little bit of like not fully a genre exercise, but like in that vein, no pun intended, sort of thing, rather than a projection of their career. I think at this time still the EPs were like a little bit of a sidestep, whatnot, whereas like, well, now they don't really do EPs, but like later on the distinction becomes completely blurred as to album, EP, and all that stuff. I think here we're still sort of using EP in like the traditional sense.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, I don't think they had become like the proper Autechre approach to EPs just yet, although they were certainly like very much getting there. So, what did you think about it revisiting it?
I really enjoyed it. I haven't ever spent 2 weeks like almost exclusively listening to this in Autechre land, because even when we did that previous episode, right. I'm sure I spent most of the time with Chiastic Slide and ran through
even Sickly
the other
Sweet
two.
I think is like a more famous celebrated EP.
Yeah, exactly. So it was nice. And then I mean, honestly, like for it being like less experimental, more like accessible and stuff was kind of fun. It's like this could be more enjoyable listening at work and stuff sometimes, I think.
Well, I mean, did it like hold up with to like close scrutiny over more than a week of just listening to this?
Yeah, I think so. Like I'm not like sick and tired of it yet. Like I'm done continually listening to it but totally just because it's only 4 tracks and it's like what is it, 20 something minutes, so it's, or 35 minutes, so it's pretty easy to get to that point, but definitely not in a way like if I have to hear these songs one more time, like I have a new appreciation for it, I think.
Yeah, I think that I came to feel like, this is a fantastic EP. I always felt that way. But for some reason this week, the last track, Drawn Quarter, kind of like clicked for me. And I now kind of feel like it's one of those top tier, very special Autechre tracks. And of course, it's like the longest track here. So in that respect, like a large chunk of this release is, to me, like very top tier Autechre. Of course, we'll talk about that one when we get there. I think everything else is really great. But, probably that one and Gaz Quarter are like, standouts. They would have to go on your Autechre playlist, if you were making a career long playlist. But I really enjoyed, honestly, like listening to something older like this. I feel like I just don't do that enough, to be perfectly honest with you. I guess because by volume, there is so much more from like that we would call later Autechre, so much more stuff. I feel like I just don't go back as often as I should. And I was kind of struck. Well, I was struck by a bunch of things. I like to throw out a bunch of like high level stuff and just see what you think. But first off, the very old school, what I consider like old school Autechre approach to structuring a track, which is kind of like, you imagine that they start with the end, how every track pretty much crescendos with like all of the loops playing simultaneously. And it's like this glorious, like multi-layered thing. And it's almost like they make that, and then the structuring of the track is kind of like just fading stuff in and out or bringing stuff in and out, so that it kind of like, maybe starts with just the B, and then in comes like a bass line and then a lead thing, and then maybe like everything will drop out except for the pads, and then the beat crashes back in with like a new lead melody over this. You know what I mean? Like, and then you kind of get the idea that it's like totally horizontal, like each track, each loop just runs over the course of the whole thing, but they're bringing things in and out. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's like a earlier electronic music, staple, and that's what they're doing here. I think that's one thing that makes this EP particularly interesting, because I think, when people think of Autechre, that's not really like exactly what they think of. So it's like a nice look at them doing, something that is, quote unquote normal and like, accessible and everything. And I find it like, interesting in that respect too.
Yeah. I mean, I guess on one hand I agree, but on the other hand, I feel like nobody does it quite like Autechre, where like the balls to wait to like get to the best part until like 6 minutes in, you know what I mean? Like the full track doesn't totally unfurl for so long, that I don't think anybody does that. I get what you mean. Like, it is kind of an early electronic approach, but most of the time they want it to hit quick, and then they're just kind of doing drops and stuff like that.
Well, I think that's why it's a good, like, sort of, this is a record that would be, like, good to give somebody who's never maybe listened to Autechre, because I think it, like, follows, like, that kind of structure of early electronic music, but in an Autechre way, like you said, like, unfurling over 6-7 minutes, not starting with, like, the big hook that's going to grab you, but rather ending with it. I feel like this is something, if somebody like has no idea about Autechre or whatever, you drop them in the middle of XI, they're probably not going to be able to wrap their head around it. But I feel like this, it's like, it's a little bit of like a key, a gateway into, the more experimental Autechre.
Yeah, I think it absolutely could be. And I was kind of struck by, because it's just funny, because they grow up in, the kind of DJ scene, right? Like that's where they kind of cut their teeth. And so they have this bag of tricks, which, all DJs have, which is like the drop, like cutting everything out and then crashing the beat back in, the stuff that just always works, like always gets people going crazy, right? It's just interesting to hear them still a little bit in that zone, whereas now, of course, they continue to play live, but they're not playing like nightclubs, and so they're so far removed from that world. It's just interesting, if you get what I mean, like to hear them kind of using, yes, traditional tricks, right? That live DJs use. Another thing that jumped out at me was, there's a somebody wrote in with this email, and I can't find it right now, but I'm sure, I'll read it later. But they had used this phrase like time dilation effect to describe where Autechre kind of goes from here, especially like when they get into LP5, they start kind of playing with time a little bit, like speeding up and slowing down. But I found myself kind of, especially after reading that comment, realizing that they're already very much interested on that here. And I'm almost wondering, like, maybe they were always interested in it, because they do this thing. I think of it as very classic Autechre, where it's like the beat will be very busy, but then they'll have these very slow, like glacially held strings or something, like pads over the top. And when that kind of joins in, it just gives this like woozy, time dilation effect where we're moving very fast and very slow simultaneously. I just found myself, now that we've, of course, gone through the whole discography, which we hadn't the first time we talked about this, just a new appreciation for, like, they would clearly take that to the next level with digital technologies, but even with like analog technologies, they were already kind of playing with time in a really cool way.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, I thought that same thing, and that's one of the things that, like, reminded me of AE 2022 Dash a bit, It's like, all 29 years later, like they're still doing that in a different way, and I think like they've taken it to the next level, but like you could see those seeds right here on Envane.
I jotted down the exact same thing. I mean, literally, that really stood out to me. Also struck by and a bunch of listeners mentioned this, and we'll read it, right? But the sound palette is the same as Chiastic Slide, very glitchy, and like analog glitch, something I associate with like power electronics, or like Pansonic, early Pansonic, like we'll talk about next week, right? Squeaking and squealing and glitching, but it's like they're using their powers for good instead of evil on this record. It's so interesting to hear how it actually works really well, because Chiastic is, pretty menacing, I think. And this has a more, frankly, like kind of joyous sound. Like, Gauze Quarter feels like it has all the warmth of classic hip hop, not just like the structure or whatever. I mean, it really feels like fun, which is a weird thing to use to describe Autechre. And then a lot of the tracks are, they're kind of moving or melancholy, but it's very hard on your sleeve, like nakedly emotional, and I'm just sort of very surprised by how well the kind of glitchy Pansonic / Chiastic Slide sound palette works in that realm.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that makes Envane like interesting too, is because they're using like that same equipment palette of Chiastic Slide, but like, I mean, Gauze Quarter is just like completely a fun song, and then like you said, like some of the synth melodies and stuff like maybe have like a somber feel to them or whatever, but I would like consider this EP, like mostly upbeat and pretty like danceable and fun, like it's mostly a fun listen.
I actually wanted to jump ahead and read, Rob, listener Rob. I realize that I'm not always like clarifying when I'm talking about Rob from Autechre and our listener Rob, but listener Rob wrote in to say, overall, this is both nostalgic and yet very suggestive of current AE's live shows. I've been very surprised by the overall nostalgic effect it has had on me. Maybe it is the god-awful news every day, the economic precariousness faced by many, as well as the aging of relatives, but to spend some time back in the mid to late 90s before all of this has proven to be very welcome and emotionally cathartic. I 100% agree, and I sort of feel like it's not just the context. I feel like there's like a nostalgia baked into this record. I'd be so curious, like, I don't know, somebody who listened to this when it came out, did you feel like it had kind of a nostalgic feel even back then, or is it the fact that it sounds like classic 90s? But I just feel almost like, I don't know, this is overreading it, right? But in a way, this is like Autechre's goodbye to quote unquote classic AE. They would never really make music like this again. And there are a lot of people, like I joked earlier, who just regret, that they never went back to like the amber, style, right? And there's a little bit of like they couldn't have possibly been thinking this far ahead, but when you listen to it, you feel a little bit of a like goodbye to this feeling. Am I overreading it?
I think that's, like being read into because what they go on to do and whatnot. It certainly does have like a bit of like nostalgia feel to it, but I think that may be just because like what this is 97, so like I don't know, the hip hop of it like sounds a little earlier, maybe 80s and stuff, so like maybe that is the nostalgia that it literally is like already a bit nostalgic. That's for a previous era. I don't think it's nostalgic in like a bad way. It's not like aping it. It's just in that vein.
I just think it's like kind of what you were saying made me think of it, right? Which is like there's often happy and sad kind of happening at the same time, and I always think of that as like the foundation of that nostalgic feeling. The last thing I wanted to point out though is I think I was most surprised by the kind of like, I don't know, this doesn't feel like the right way to describe it, but like a jazzy kind of played quality to a lot of the melodies here. Like when the kind of last half melody of God's Quarter comes in, it's got this kind of floaty, like synth solo over the top feel. Or I think it's Drawn Quarter has like this kind of, the lead synth is like almost, it's got like kind of a brassy, like flugelhorn type of a like quality or something. And I just find it really interesting because it's hard. Like if you try to sing along to that melody, you'll notice that it's kind of hard because it's less like a melody and more like improvising on a scale, It's also sometimes in a jazzy way, kind of like taking unexpected gaps between beats or like between notes and stuff. Like it's I don't know how to quite like it. I don't know. It just made me feel like there's something that feels like played and improvised about this, which I really feel is like kind of contradictory to the way I personally conceptualize early Autechre, and honestly made me think a little bit about their increasing interest in adding improvisatory elements to their music, like all the way on 2022 Dash. But you kind of get what I mean? Like there are a lot of lead melodies that sound like somebody playing on a keyboard, like sort of soloing in a scale or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I thought the same thing as I was like listening, deeply. Like just sometimes like, I don't know very much about like music theory and all that stuff, but like just the way it feels played, sometimes feels played rather than programmed. I think like you said, like different notes that are maybe like I don't know about scales and stuff, but like around that or whatnot. It doesn't feel like computerized.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I like that. It feels played rather than programmed. And I feel totally opposite when I listen to like Chiastic Slide, for example. This just has this weird kind of like human playfulness to it. I don't know. It's just honestly shocking like what skilled like musicians they are. I think we don't really like think in those terms, but this EP really proves it. As always, we got a bunch of listener write-ins, and I like to kind of like lay them out on the table before we kind of jump in. We've got listeners writing about the big picture here, and then later we'll have listeners writing about individual tracks, but we'll take it back and forth. I'll start with Marcy, who says, Envane is probably my favorite EP of theirs. All 4 songs are phenomenal and unique. Even though it is a companion to Chiastic Slide, it definitely feels like its own thing, far from Leftovers. The percussion has a much warmer feel to it, unlike most songs on Chiastic or Tri Repete. It's fascinating how, unlike most artists, some of their best work is on the EPs.
Jackson says, I like how it complements the weird and often foreboding Chiastic Slide. The 2 releases provide context for each other.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah, they're almost like yin and yang. EBCD says, a go-to winter record for me. In terms of my general thoughts, I find that while I like Chiastic Slide, I don't think it's an all-time favorite record of mine in Autechre's catalog, but it has easily the best supplementary material of any record they've released since. I think Sickly Sweet and Envane are both my top 2 Autechre EPs, and it's not even close. Every track on Envane is at least good, if not really fantastic.
Joe says, I've come to the conclusion that what they've done in this era is actually a very early version of what they did with the Quarestis era releases with multiple permutations of the same ideas. I've always found it fascinating that they claimed that Sickly Sweet started out as all remixes of Sickly, even though Keenel 4, which came out 7 months before, sounds far more like Sickly than anything on Sickly Sweet. On the other hand, God's Quarter sounds so similar to the side AA on the Keenel remixes single that it could almost be classified as a remix or alternate version. I think that at this point, they had already been interested in the idea of multiple versions and the fine line between what counts as a track and what counts as a set of patches.
Yeah, and then he wrote this in, like a timeline for this era, which I was kind of bowled over by a little bit. All right, so if you kind of walk through this, on June 6, 1996, they released Keenel, Gescom's Keenel, right, which is 38 minutes long. On November 25th, 1996, so just a couple months later, they released the Keenel Remixes single. That's 19 minutes of new material. January 27th, 1997, we get Envane. That's about 37 minutes long. February 17th, so less than a month later, 1997, Chiastic Slide. That's 70 minutes long. Then August 26, 1997, we get Sickly Sweet, which is 30 minutes long. The total is 194 minutes or 3 hours and 14 minutes of material. And for reference, Joe writes, the entire Quarestis era is 235 minutes long if you subtract out the 59-minute long Perlin subrange 636. So what do you think of the overall claim? I got to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical about like sort of thinking about it like the first kind of, test run of what they would later do with Quarestis as far as like releasing stuff that's like various permutations of each other, although maybe there's some merit there. But also just in general, I am kind of knocked out by like just how on fire they were in this period. I mean, they put out a lot of stuff. Like you could make, a fantastic 3 hours of really high level shit from this. But what do you think about Joe's theory?
Yeah, I mean, it's seeing it like, written out like that, it is like pretty crazy. I never realized like all those things were so close together. Mm-hmm. Even just like Envane and Chiastic being like less than a month apart. I never realized that. I don't know if they're like purposely, working towards like what they did with Quarestis, but, like you can see the seeds there and, like maybe, maybe that like is what spurs the idea.
Yeah, I could be persuaded. I don't think I would tie like all of this stuff together necessarily, but there is something going on here where they get kind of interested in an annoying way in calling things remixes that, you listen to it, you're like, what the hell? This is what? This is a remix? Or not calling stuff a remix that obviously is, so they kind of get like into that zone. And clearly what they're doing is like they kind of claim with Envane, right? Is like starting with the same material, but it just goes a completely different way. And in that respect, you could kind of see it as a little bit Quarestis-y or a little bit AE 2022-E, right? Which is like, this doesn't have to be just one way, or we can't decide which one way we want it. So we are going to sort of covertly release multiple different versions and not have to pick, right?
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like perhaps like like some of this, and maybe here even on Envane, it's like maybe they started remixing New Wayne, but I feel like it just gets so far off the original idea. It's almost like they started with the track title, New Wayne remix, and so they're like, well, I guess we're sticking with that, sort of thing. Like that's sort of what it feels like. It's like often just gets like through experimentation and jamming and playing around and stuff, like just gets to a completely different world.
Yeah, and I agree that kind of is their current MO, which is really interesting. I would bet that even if this is the right way to look at it, like it probably didn't occur to them at the time. Maybe only in retrospect, right? Did they realize they were kind of interested in that? But All right, that's all the stuff up front. Let's dive into these 4 glorious tracks. We'll start with track 1, Gauze Quarter. Some notes from AE Pages here. Gauze Quarter, of course, samples Dr. Octagon's No Awareness. This is a side project of Kool Keith. The sample line was later confirmed by Kool Keith to be "Watch You Jam Like Autechre." It's funny because I think there was some, like, nobody was quite sure what exactly he was saying, like Autechre or something, but it was just like 2 or 3 years ago that somebody asked him on Twitter, and he confirmed that he meant Autechre. He meant the group Autechre, which is very interesting. The other note here from AE Pages, according to Rob, the scratching on the track was achieved with real vinyl, which is interesting. Different, I'm assuming, from the way that they did the Set B and Set C on 2022 Dash scratching. A lot of listener write-ins about this track, which we'll get on the table here. You want to read the first one, Dan?
Yeah, EBCD says, a perfect opener. The beat may be simple, but I think the sound design of the drums are perfectly crunchy, and the kick and snare have a really nice punch. It also has some great melodies bookending. The lead melody that begins the track is fun and quirky with its sort of vintage analog synth tones, but the chord progression that comes in towards the end is genuinely really beautiful and soothing by comparison.
Listener Marcy says, probably the most unique song of the bunch, one of the rare Autechre tracks with voice samples in it. I don't usually hear the hip-hop influence in their tracks, but it definitely shines through on this one. The second half is pure bliss. This writing got me wondering, like, I think there are a lot of Autechre beats that are like, they are pure hip-hop, but you might not even realize unless, like, if they threw some scratching on it, you would be like, oh yeah, this is super hip-hop. But it's like you just don't even,
yeah, it's like
realize
so,
without it.
It's like so deconstructed or something that, it goes right over you. Yeah, totally. Jackson says, so intimate and beautiful. One of my favorite songs of all time and easily top 5 in the AE discography. I used to listen to it walking around campus in the early mornings, and it made me feel more emotion than most musicians whose whole thing is focused on tugging at your heartstrings. The emotion is impossible to articulate, but it feels so deeply human. Gauze Quarter just makes me grateful that my parents made me.
Listener Sunil says, this song contains some of my favorite Autechre melody work. The elements of the track seem like an odd assortment on paper, yet they all sound very natural together. My favorite part is the quiet counterpoint melody that comes in at 5:30. It's so beautiful. I find it really moving. There are comparisons to be made with AE Live when it comes to the hip-hop elements and interesting synergies, but the feel is very different. Gauze Quarter is far more clean and tidy.
Rob says, this is so hip-hop as to be quite disarming. It's almost as if Rob and Sean wanted to demonstrate their seriousness when they said that they were big fans of hip-hop. Because of this, the track sounds quite dated, but this unlocks quite a bit of nostalgia in me. The scratching and snatches of vocals remind me of their set B and C sets. When the IDM synth melodies come in after about 4 minutes, it's like the 80s meets the 90s in such a pretty way that I'm transported back to rural England in the 90s listening to RDJ and other Warp artists on CD, my Sony Discman. Emotional stuff.
And listener Joe says, when you were talking about the hip-hop elements of Envane, I think you can most clearly hear this on Gauze Quarter with the voices and the scratching. I'm not sure how I really feel about the sound design here. I love how on both the Keynells and Chiastic Slide, you really have a sense of space, but Gauze Quarter just sounds so compressed. It almost reminds me of what Gabe said years ago about Untilted, how it sounds like it's playing directly in your head. But while that production style worked really well for the sound palette of Untilted, here I just don't think it's well suited and just sounds really thin. Every time I've listened to Gauze Quarter, I end up wanting to listen to Keynell AA instead, where I feel like they already got this idea down much better. So what do you think of Gauze Quarter?
Yeah, Gauze Quarter, it's great, obviously. I love that like clicking hi-hat that leads the whole record in. You know, it's like such a good way to start like a record. I love the way that synth, it has like such a it's like the release is so short, it just like little stabs of it. It's like we never get to hear like its full sound that it's making. It's always like a little cut off or something. And then the beat itself is just like so groovy. I love that kick drum, the snare, so snappy. I think one of the listeners said like the drum sound design is so good. I totally agree. It's just like pure, hip hop beat. And then, of course, we've got that vocal sound, which is a rare thing in Autechre. And I think, like, I'm mostly glad it's rare because it can be like a little corny or overused or whatnot. But I think here, it's really well done. It's obviously cool, like that it's something saying their name.
Yeah.
And I always like, is it jam like a Autechre, like the gun, or is it, like that was always like a fun little, mystery and whatnot. So I really like it. This is just like, an absolute star of the discography, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit already, but it has this like instant classic feel, and I think it's kind of what Rob was talking about as well in his write-in. Like it already sounds classic, I think, and I bet it already did when you first listened to it, because of the kind of skillful way it's combining what feels like old school hip hop with, what then would have felt like kind of cutting edge IDM, but now it feels like kind of classic IDM. But it just has this instant classic quality, and like I said earlier, just incredibly struck by the kind of analog glitchy quality. You said like the way that hat comes in, it's like very squeaky and feedbacky. Reminds me like there's another world where that hat could go the way of Pansonic Colma, instead of like this really groovy thing kicks in. But yeah, instead we get this like real boom bap hip hop beat, which is just fantastic. You get a lot of, this is something I still hear them do a lot of today, right? Which is using melodic elements as percussion, right? So it's got this kind of like, almost like chic rhythm guitar, kind of like a groove to it, adds like a little bit of extra funk to it. Really fantastic. And yeah, what I was kind of writing down is like, I don't know, it's striking that the scratching, right, of the vocal sample, it has this kind of weird like metallic resonance on it a little bit, like this weird effect. It's almost like they are glitchizing even that a little bit. It just adds like this scuzzy, dirty, Pansonic-y quality even to classic stuff, which I just can't believe it actually works.
Yeah. There's some sort of like a filter or something going on it. Yeah, it's really interesting. A thing I really like about this track is like something you really never get in Autechre is like this is like kind of percussion. It's like it's fun to like drum along with it or something. Me finger drumming at work. It's like rarely does like the percussion like make any logical sense in Autechre, I think. So it's like it's fun to like have like that, just real like feel the beat kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's so good that it kind of has this, like this track has this quality of sort of being two tracks, the way it's sort of like you start with this kind of funky melody, kind of like, rhythm over the top, and then it sort of drops out and you get kind of just the beat riding, and then they bring in the really like kind of floaty, emotional, kind of searching synth melody, which a bunch of our listeners highlighted as just one of the most beautiful things they've done. But it's almost like the beat was so good they had to use it twice, for basically two tracks.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, we can keep it moving along to track 2, Latent Quarter. Listener Joe wrote in about this one to say, I personally think this is the standout here, just in terms of how totally nuts the sound design is right off the bat. I think the production works much better here, and even though it still sounds very direct, there is more space for the sound to breathe. I love how throughout the first minute or so, it almost sounds like the percussion is untangling. It becomes a total banger in the second half with that heavy beat. The Chiastic era trick of having the percussion stripped away and let the beatless synth pads just continue on alone for a minute or two never gets old, and I think this is one of the many successful times they did it in this era.
Rob says the scuzzy steel drum-like intro initially reminds me of Apex's Alberto Balsam, but then it kind of all falls apart in a very Autechre way before the hip-hop beat kicks in. Around 4 minutes in, the huge, bassy, throbbing tones kick in, and it sounds incredible through headphones. There are these slightly sad minor chords playing in the background, which gives it a faintly maudlin vibe, which is an interesting counterpoint to the throbbing beat/synths.
Listener Sunil says, this sound palette is interesting. It's very low-bit sounding in a way that gives it an old and dusty sort of feel, or as Rob put it, scuzzy, right? My wife said it sounds like sound effects from 90s PC games. This actually does have a somewhat AE Live feel to me, I think because there's so many little variations and tweaks happening, as well as a general hazy quality throughout the sound.
Marcy says, one of their weirdest early bangers, really love how the beat just materializes around 2 minutes in.
And listener EBCD says, a criminally underrated track, probably overlooked because it's maybe not as immediately remarkable as the two tracks surrounding it. It has the most vivid atmosphere. The intro in particular really evokes the feeling of marching through heavy snowbanks with its erratic and bouncing rhythm juxtaposed with how crunchy the sound of it is. The more focused beat that comes in is just another really solid hip-hop groove, but the latter half of the track is what sticks with me. I love the groaning analog sub bass that comes in foremost alongside the sort of clarinet-like melody that comes in later. And on top of that, the drums that kick in during the second half once again make for a simple but really effective groove. I keep obsessing over this track for how it manages to keep a steady and danceable pace while also decidedly not having a kick on the downbeat. It's a small choice that really makes this beat so much more iconic. So what do you think about this one, Latent Quarter?
This one again, like, has a little bit of that like 2-song quality with that intro, before the whole beat comes in. I really love that intro. It's got a little bit of that like time stretching thing you were talking about earlier. I feel like in it, and then like, you get into this pretty energetic beat, which I feel like is not what you were expecting, during this intro. I think the intro is like pretty like kind of droney and light and, since we keep talking about Colma, makes me feel like, we're going to go in that direction a little bit.
Glitchy,
but, but then like the energy of that beat is way more than that intro.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, because it's a long intro of just like, it sounds like real squishy. Actually, it's funny because Joe had complained that he feels like God's Quarter sounds a little compressed. I think that's like all the kind of, just all the glitching and distortion kind of on everything. This track kind of starts like that. Everything's all squished and glitchy and squeaking. And then it kind of just opens up when the beat drops, which is just fantastic. But yeah, I love I think it was Rob compared it to a steel drum, but it sounds like a steel drum, kind of recorded on a tape deck or something, so it's like distorting. It's got this lo-fi. And then when that beat slams in, it's like punchy. It almost has a, blown out kind of tape deck quality to it, which I just think is, fantastic. Ends up sounding and feeling a little bit like a lo-fi marching band or something, especially with the like kind of the way the snares are kind of playing and with the like, stuttering, almost drill and bass-ish underneath, as you mentioned. But yeah, I gotta say that my absolute favorite part of this whole track, I forget who was the first to mention it, but like that really deep analog bass, that kind of kicks in like toward the end, like this deep bass groan. It's almost cello-like, and it just like, I don't know, it just like is so. It's exactly what you want from like an old analog bass. You know what I mean? It's like so warm and just. My sub just like is like rumbling. I just love that.
Yeah. It sounds so great. I just love how like crunchy and everything is here. It's like, it feels like it's almost like a bit crush, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel like quite so digital. Like I'm not fully sure how it's done.
Yeah, this was weirdly, I don't know why. This was my wife announced that this was her favorite of the whole thing. She actually genuinely really likes it. Well, we'll keep moving on to track 3, which is Laughing Quarter. Now, AE Pages has a little note about this one, which is that vinyl pressings of Envane with an XAE B-side matrix feature an alternate outro for this track, different to the one on the digital release. I'm not sure I understand what the hell that means, but on YouTube, you can look, and I'll link it in the show notes, you can listen to like this kind of special little outro that is on some pressing. Did you check this out? It kind of just like, I mean, it's interesting because, maybe we're doing this backwards, like talking about the alternate version before we talk about the main version, but it basically just does like the normal outro, except it starts like stuttering and tripping over itself. It kind of goes into this like, almost like off balance halftime kind of a thing. And I just found it interesting because it really reminded me of more like a little forward looking at the kind of Confield approach or like the Gantz Graph EP approach a little bit about like beats tripping over themselves and stuttering and stuff like that. I just thought that was a little glimpse at the future maybe.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
It's very short. Very short.
Yeah. It's not like mind-blowingly different, but it was interesting, and I do know what that means. The matrix. The matrix is like the when you look at a record. at the runoff groove, there's something stamped in it, and that's what it means. XAE is what's stamped in it.
Oh, so like what is this? They like just press them.
That's like essentially like the barcode for a record. Like that's how you tell like the specific pressing of something is the matrix code. In the,
so there's just like one pressing, and like for fun they put a little slightly different version or something.
Seems like it.
Very mysterious. All right, so with this track, Laughing Quarter, let's get the listeners on the table. I'll start with Marcy, who says, straight up insane, maybe their most evil song. That is quite a bold claim, but I can see it.
Sunil says, a wild combination of rhythms and textures, really captivating. I find I actually enjoy this one the most at milder volumes. The beats have a raw energy about them that could be compared to set B and parts of set C.
EBCD, it's funny to go straight from set B,
yeah.
C, and now the listener EBCD says, one of the hardest bangers that Autechre have ever dropped, some of their best drum sequencing and sound design. The drums are so frenzied and chaotic, yet have such a clear and headbanging groove to them that I feel is often missing in similar tracks, i.e. a lot of Aphex Twins drill and bass tracks. Maybe that's a hot take. I adore the stuttered and ratcheting snares, and just as much love the sort of snarling, hissing noise that accompanies it, not to mention, once again, some really great melodies on display. I really like the sort of quirky bass line that starts the track off, and the more delicate melody that comes in towards the end is also one of their best.
Joe says, now that I've been Pansonic pilled, I think I can say that the first 15 seconds of Laughing Quarter almost sounds like something from the first disc of Kesto, in that they're playing around with knobs and making this incredible, very present electric sound that then suddenly shifts into sinister, chiastic recordings of machines working on their inscrutable purposes. Some might say that the synth pads from this era sound dated, but I think they still sound as pretty as they ever did.
And listener Rob says, this feels less hip-hop and more 90s era Autechre, such as Chiastic Slide or even Tri-Rep. I like this era a lot, so it's a pleasant walk back down memory lane. Discordant beats with lovely melodies interwoven throughout. Once again, a track full of nostalgia for me. Makes me realize how far Autechre have traveled away from this, but how beautiful this music is/was. Yeah, I like that Rob said that about the kind of like Tri-Rep comparison, because one thing that sort of stands out to me here is, this kind of like mechanical, like gears of a clock type of quality to the beat, which I do associate with Tri-Rep, but honestly, as we talked about at length, like you hear in a lot of places still in 2022 Dash. But there is specifically this sound that reminds me of, the first track on Tri-Rep, like Dale, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's got that like sort of distorted vocal sample for the snare, like, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is using some similar effect. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it sounds like a vocal sample, but there is some kind of like weird Dale-esque clacking in here. So I totally hear the kind of Tri-Rep comparison, a little more mechanical quality to this. What do you think about this track?
I get what like one of those listeners said about it being a little sinister. This one feels a little bit more like in line with Chiastic Slide. I love just like how like it gets so like big and crashing. Mm-hmm. It does have like a very like clockwork kind of feel to it. Very mechanical. The like little single synth notes that get played have like a really kind of like robotic quality to it. It may be my favorite on here. I think it's like I don't know. It's pretty awesome track.
Yeah, it's pretty unique because I wrote down, I don't know, maybe this is a weird comparison, but to me it has something of the feel of like dub reggae a little bit. Like it has this weird kind of like lurching off balance kind of like stomp to it.
Yeah.
And the way like, I don't know, just like the way the snares are hitting like on the, kind of like on the offbeat, it just has that. You kind of feel me?
Yeah, now that you like spell it out, I think that's like essentially what I was looking for. When I said like the kind of rising, crashing, like I don't know, it like makes you want to move in a certain way, and it's like it's that same sort of way that like dub does. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's
really unique. And then of course, it's funny because I think that this EP as a whole is really associated with like some of these absolutely gorgeous melodies. Late in Quarter, I think that's actually a little bit, more on the back burner, but here we come right back to the kind of like Gauze Quarter approach, which is halfway through, we get this kind of new main hook. In this case, it's like these little, almost like electro blips, but they're very dreamy. They have this kind of keyboard solo quality, like again, just like Gauze Quarter, as if there is a scale or something and a human being is sitting here playing. It's actually interesting. The way it comes in is a little bit more reserved. Like it's just a couple notes here and there, and then it kind of builds up as like a solo does, but it is just absolutely gorgeous. This kind of strangely like jazzy keyboard solo,
Yeah, I feel like the synth, there's like a lot going on and a lot to like kind of pay attention to that I think like initially gets kind of overshadowed by the beat. Like this track is so like, beat forward, like the percussion sounds are just like so up front that like I think I didn't really even notice until I was like in headphones, like, kind of paying attention to each instrumental track or whatever, that like, there's sometimes the synths are doing like some really, pretty or interesting things that I think just don't like immediately pop out.
Yeah, it makes me think of actually the way that this kind of like the sparing way this is played. I was thinking of the did you ever see that part on The Simpsons where Lisa takes Homer to like a jazz show or something and he's not feeling it, and she's like, it's about the notes he's not playing. And he's like, I could have listened to the notes he's not playing at home. Awesome. All right. We can move it on then to the last track, Drawn Quarter. A lot of listeners writing about this one. Listener Marcy says, an all-around beautiful track, insanely pretty melodies. If someone says Autechre songs are not emotional, just show them this.
Rob says, this is, even by their standards, an insanely good track to bury as track 4 on an EP. It seems to build on 90s era RDJ and take us somewhere into space, but it's the percussion and the fragmented nature of prettiness that kind of reminds me of 2022 Dash's set C and D. Nothing stays around for long melody-wise, but it all adds up to a gorgeous whole. The emotive melody at around 5 minutes, 50 seconds, and that runs through the track for the next couple minutes. Whilst other beautiful melodies are added over the top. It's like they took all the prettiness of I Care Because You Do and put it all in one track. Incredible.
Listener Sunil says, one of Autechre's most beautiful and moving pieces, the contrast between the melody and the beat is particularly interesting here. The melody always sounds like it's slowing down, tired, and resigned. The beat, on the other hand, is fast, insistent, and relentless. Sometimes I'll imagine the beat is an old robot carrying out some task while on its last legs and near death, and the beat is a slave driver pushing the robot to keep working. It sounds very much like a precursor to LP5 in terms of the melody and time dilation qualities. That was the time dilation comment I was mentioning earlier.
Joe says, I love the name Drawn Quarter, and for a track that references one of the most brutal forms of execution in human history, it's definitely the prettiest on the EP. Do you have any idea what the voice is at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds? I weirdly can't find any reference to it anywhere, not even on AE pages, and I hope I'm not crazy and the only person who hears it. I'll stop right there and say that, one, I had made a note that is this a pun on Drawn and Quarter, so I'm glad Joe sees that. And two, I also made notes about that voice and not being able to figure out what it was. So you're not crazy. I do hear it.
I wrote down, what is this backwards devil talk? There's definitely some weird whispery like stuff underneath here. And yeah, I haven't, I don't know, somebody asked them on Mastodon. It's funny, I could make my own Mastodon account, but I just like barking orders that nobody's ever going to follow. But I don't know. I bet it's just like, I don't know, some kind of chatter, like something that like got picked up on something, not a sample maybe necessarily. But yeah, I definitely hear it. Last listener writing in about this one, EBCD says, definitely the weakest track to me. I think its length is kind of excessive, but I still enjoy it while it lasts for its fun sort of jittery rhythm, especially accented by that rattling percussive sound throughout. And I also think the ambient outro is really nice. So I mentioned earlier that I kind of came to feel like this is the best track on the EP this week, and that it is a one of those real classic AE tracks, really just taken by in a way that I'm not sure I ever was before. And I think it's because of, well, first off, like what ABCD said there, which is this kind of like, jittery rhythm. I wrote down like, it sounds like loose screws or something, like rattling and jangling, kind of a quality to it. But it is especially because of what Sunil said about that time dilation quality. The beat is so jittery and fast and busy, and yet the kind of melodies over the top are very, I like how he described it as kind of tired and resigned or weary. I was thinking, because we just talked all about this on, we talked about the Kraftwerk record, and the song Computer Love, how the synth sounds lonely, like this synth sounds kind of lonely, which is just incredible because it's over the top of a very busy beat,
Yeah, I mean, they do like such a good trick of like, like they're doing 16th notes on the hi-hat, so it's that's double time, so it feels like totally, it makes that synth feel way slower than it is and everything. And I think they do such a good job of it. And that hat on here, it sounds like chirping crickets or something, like it doesn't really sound like a hi-hat. It's just, playing the role of it.
Yeah. And like, I don't know, just the way that, this is the sort of synth lead that I compared to like a flugelhorn or something. It just has like this lonely, searching, horn, like playing by itself, kind of a quality. And then of course, what happens toward the end is, it feels like this string section kind of joins in, it's synths obviously, but it has this orchestral feel. And then, stunningly, the track basically stops with 3 minutes still to go, and we just get this gorgeous kind of like vintage synth wash. I mean, it really reminds me in a lot of ways of like the most emotive moments of the Sign record, right? It just has that kind of like lush, melancholy quality. And I don't know, it's almost like the outro of this would be good enough to be like a standout track on Sign if it was on there.
Yeah, I love the way the outro is. Like, I think that's just like a perfect way to end this like pretty beat heavy. Like we've been dancing for 30 minutes. It gives you like a little bit of a cool down. And I think it really like, the problem with a lot of bands EPs and stuff are like, it just kind of feels like a tossed together, selection of B-sides or something. And I think here like it ending in that, come down and everything like really makes this feel like put together and like it all belongs together and like an album. Like it like makes it feel like an album.
Now I also wanted to read this from listener Marcy, who wrote in to say, something else I feel like I have to talk about is the live version of Drawn Quarter heard in the New York 1998 live show soundboard, or was that 2001, or is it Vancouver 1998? Wait, Aphex Twin was there. The answer is most likely no to all of them. The history around that soundboard is a whole other enigma in itself. It gets mislabeled very often for some reason. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but yes, indeed, this kind of famous soundboard that for some reason, I don't know, nobody quite knows exactly where and when it's from, but Drawn Quarter is indeed on it. Marcy continues, the track starts around 14:15. It has the same strings, but a completely different, more frantic beat, closer to the LP5's Sickly Sweet sound and some more melodic synth elements. It's a very interesting listen, definitely on par with the original. Give a listen to the soundboard if you haven't yet. It's one of my favorites and has different versions of Tilapia and Gayquad in it as well. I gave this a listen. Thank you, Marcy, for bringing it to my attention. I realized that I actually had it. I have this big folder of Autechre bootlegs, but it was an OGG file for some reason. I don't know what the hell that is, honestly. Like OGG. But I learned that Plex can play that, so I got to actually listen to it on my speakers. And yeah, first off, it's an incredible set. It has like kind of an LP5 sound, and it is really fascinating. Marcy is exactly right. To hear Drawn Quarter played like in LP5 mode, I think it is absolutely worth listening to. And again, I'm just going to put a link in the show notes so everybody else checks it out.
Yeah, I took a quick listen to Drawn in it, and it is interesting. It's cool how different it is. I'm definitely going to listen to the rest of the tape, especially because you're going to send it to me in OGG because that's a good quality.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I don't want to listen on YouTube.
No, I know. Yeah, no, but it's just like Sunil says, that there's kind of a precursor to LP5 feel to this track, and then it's cool to hear it actually arrive there. It's just really, really interesting. All right, we've made it through the 4 tracks. We can sort of finish with, by zooming back out with our high level thoughts. Any change in your overall impressions now that we've talked about it? Any new clarity on this record's relationship to like the stuff that came after, even all the way to 2022 Dash?
Well, I'll say that it definitely I called it out, but I see like some glimpses of the future, of AE 2022 Dash in here. Obviously the little hip hop bits, some of that time playing around, all that. In general of how I like it, I definitely really enjoyed spending time with just this over the past week and a half, 2 weeks. And even I was saying it works so well as a full EP. I think it also works well in the other way of just track by track. As I was writing notes and stuff, I was like, okay, I'll just listen to this track, write note, go on to the next one. And it totally worked in that way too. It's they could stand alone together. I think that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic. And just like I was saying at the front, I think that my big revelation this week was that I always used to think of this EP as a bit of an outlier, like a little bit of a genre exercise, like you mentioned earlier, or just them in kind of playful fun mode, which it was not their main, MO at that time at all. But listening to it now and kind of knowing where they go after this, it doesn't feel like as much of an outlier. Actually, it feels like an important kind of piece of the big puzzle. It is certainly accessible, but there are qualities to this that are just like Chiastic Slide and just like Sickly Sweet. It's like the sound of, artists kind of pushing up against maybe the limits of analog gear a little bit, doing, trying some things that you can tell that they're going to need to, just discover new ways to kind of make music to kind of continue chasing. And I appreciate it, I don't know, just in a new way, that you can kind of actually hear that on this fantastic EP. I also wanted to add this to the record here, which is, by my calculation, I didn't do a bunch of research or anything, but by my calculation, this might be the last time that Autechre used an image of an actual thing for their cover art. Envane's cover is famously an abstracted version of a photograph of Falling Water, that famous house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the American architect. And when asked in an AAA if that was their idea or the designer's Republic's, Rob said that was sort of a combination of things. We'd been hitting him with some ideas, some conditions for a few things that we had on our minds. Well, I think at the same time he was about to show us that Falling Water pic. So if I recall correctly, he went away and then came back with the situation via the conditions. So I guess in other words, he altered this picture in a way that they were kind of imagining. It seems like maybe they were already kind of thinking about going, just full abstract shapes, but he kind of combined it with an image. But there's something interesting about that this is a point where they leave behind, pictures or actual identifiable objects.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're using identifiable objects, a little loosely. I remember that learning that this was Falling Water on our first time we went through this, and I happen to remember that when I was reading through our notes here. But it's not completely obvious.
Yeah, you would never figure it out by yourself.
Yeah, I don't think so.
All right. Well, we've got some listeners kind of big picture stuff, or maybe even slightly off topic stuff to kind of start to wrap up with. First, I wanted to read this track by track breakdown by Essie, who is Joe's young daughter, of God's Quarter. She said, this sounds like bees with laser stingers. Of Leighton Quarter, she said, this sounds like drum lasers. Of Laughing Quarter, this sounds like tree lasers. And of Drawn Quarter, this sounds like the drum lasers again. So there you have it. I couldn't have put it any better myself. Here's one from Sunil, who says, I honestly think Envane is a contender for best Autechre EP. I'm not sure it necessarily is the best, but it belongs in the conversation at least. Every track is a high tier banger and each very distinct from the rest. I didn't give you any preparation for this, but Is this the best EP? Is it at least a contender for the best EP?
Like right now, it's easy to say yes because I've been listening to it and haven't been listening to the other ones. But it's definitely like one of the most fun. And like I said, this is one that I like throughout my life put on sometimes because of its like not a crazy length and everything. So I think it's definitely like in the conversation. I don't know that I would say it's number one, but it's probably in the top 5, just going off the top of my head.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't think I'm putting it number one. I mean, I'm probably still going garbage over this. Maybe Sickly Sweet, EP7 if we count that as an EP. I love GONKCAST. I love Elevent like more than I think most people do.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, it's in the conversation. It's up there. I was also thinking a little bit about like Anvil Vapor, which is the one of the or it's kind of like the other Tri-Rep EP other than the the almighty garbage. But it's funny because Anvil Vapor, I think I would be curious to revisit that because I always remember this as maybe like the most dated thing they made. In a way, it's got this kind of like I don't know, like 90s gritty, grimy, like Trent Reznor kind of a quality. And there are points on Envane, which is not that much, not that far after. Where it's very distorted. It reminds me a little bit like those are the only parts that I think this sounds a little dated, but anyway, that was just a stray thought. Listener Joe says Envane, Keenel, and Sickly Sweet really make me miss the classic 40-minute EP format that AE used to do so perfectly that almost feels like a really good novella, whereas the albums feel more like novels. Do you miss the EP Autechre? Do you wish we would get more of these little bite-sized things?
Sometimes it is nice. I mean, I kind of just got done saying this, but like, you don't always have 6 hours to listen to, LSEC or something. And so it is nice. I mean, especially like in this 2 weeks that we've been listening to this, like I always talk about, like I always listen to these records on my walks. It's been frigidly cold here in Florida, and so my walks have been much shorter, so it's been nice to have just a 35-minute EP to listen to. I mean it would be nice. It would be nice to get another 35-40-minute bite-sized Autechre. Also, I like that we're like, it's a 40-minute EP, whereas like that's a normal album.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's on one hand, I am absolutely like one thing I love most about Autechre is the enormous canvas, on which they paint, right? But yeah, there is something like it's remarkable how good they are at both sort of short form and long form. Listener Jackson says, I know the idea here was to look back at this with set C in mind, and I was thinking about that. Feels like you can hear both are made by the same artist, despite being absolutely worlds apart. I wonder if I would feel that way had I not heard middle Techer records, like Bridging the Gap, so to speak. Interesting thought experiment. Do you think you would ever in a million years recognize this as like the same artist that made 2022 Dash if you hadn't heard what was in the middle?
I wish I could do that, like so much. I don't know, because like clearly we're picking out like, oh, this sounds like this, but yeah, I mean, is it because like not only have we heard all that, but we've like almost studied it kind of thing? I don't know. I think you'd be kind of you definitely wouldn't like guess off the top of your head, I don't think.
Yeah, but maybe it would be surprising, like, because I bet if you gave me those two things and you were like, what do you notice is similar, I bet I would find connection, some of those connections.
True.
But yeah. I don't know if I would ever guess it's like, I would guess it was somebody inspiring somebody or something like that at best, right?
Yeah.
All right, listener Marcy says, a weird detail I've noticed is the parallels between this and the Anvil Vapor EP. This is why it was on my mind. I remember now. There's obviously the titles. All 4 songs have second in Anvil, and all 4 have quarter in this. But what's weirder is that the track lengths also almost perfectly line up. Both EPs have a about 9-minute 40-second opener, 2 about 7:30 tracks in the middle, and a about 10-minute 50-second closer. Wonder if it's only a coincidence or intentional. That's goddamn weird, isn't it?
Yeah, we got ourselves a conspiracy theory over here. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it might just be that is what comfortably fits on, a 12-inch EP.
It's weird. It's really weird. It's almost like, I don't know. It's almost like, yeah, because in this period, like we were saying, they were kind of like beginning to really, really, I don't know, almost really like to discover the potential of the EP format. This is kind of like that golden era of that. And I wonder if, I don't know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like if it's like,
yeah,
that worked really well for a short form structure. Let's do something like long, short, long, or, something like that. It just happened to be really close. All right. Listener Mike says, I understand the concept of a 60-minute album is now antiquated, but I would love to hear a studio product from the 2022- project. This is only for selfish purposes, as I am now a 47-year-old man and old-fashioned, but I would prefer a studio release. Not like a best of, but something like NTS where I feel like I am listening to predetermined units of tracks that were finished and released in a final form. I know they don't care, or rather released it like this as the point, but I find myself struggling to remember where I heard amazing parts due to the density of the music. TTT made it ever so slightly better, but I asked myself, why is it easier to have a wiki page on how to actually listen to the project? It has definitely gone over my head. I wanted to read this because we don't hear enough from people who are, a little bit fed up with the 2022 approach, or like not willing to go all the way along. At the same time though, Mike had added in his email, I saw them live in 2025 in Boston, and they were amazing. I think they played for 1 hour and 20 minutes-ish. The crowd for the show was unique. There were tons of people, and I'm sure they were not expecting the show they saw. Some people were definitely expecting a techno or dance hall show, and instead witnessed an Autechre sermon with the lights out and the venue having curtains up in the hallway. It was an almost religious experience. So, I don't know. It kind of sounds, Mike, like you do enjoy it. You know what I mean? It's just like maybe there is the possibility it's not even supposed to be something you listen to over and over again, but something more like an experience, Yeah,
I get his point though. Like, it can be, you can enjoy it when you're in the room and it's happening to you, but then also, not have the patience or the time or want to like have to dig into this 2022 stuff. I mean, because we even talked about it before we like started doing it here on the podcast. Like when all those kind of got dumped out, we didn't really understand it.
Yeah.
I know, like personally, I just was sort of listening to some of the shows here and there. I didn't really know what was going on, and it really took like sitting down and like getting academic on it that like it really made it click. So I totally understand why somebody would not want to bother doing all that.
Yeah, I wanted the people who are annoyed to feel heard, especially us talking about Envane, like really classic 90s AE. Maybe somebody's going to tune into this episode who hasn't been on board with the newest stuff, but. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of like, that was kind of our goal with the episodes, and we'll do more episodes as more stuff comes out, but on the 2022- project to maybe make it a little bit more digestible for people. But that's everything on this. You want to end with some new music recommendations?
Yeah. All right. Last week, we spoke a good amount about minimalism. But someone we didn't mention was Charlemagne Palestine. Staplat Records just released a live recording from a 2024 concert called "The Organ is the World's Greatest Synthesizer," and it's a pretty good record. It starts out a bit of chanting. Not my favorite part, but after like 4 minutes, that goes away, and then it's just like a full-on organ drone. The first half, it's like split into two sides, and like the first half is like pretty glacial, very slow, almost unchanging. But then the second side picks up a little bit. Still slow, glacial, but like we're getting a bit more change. Just like absolutely hypnotic. It's like the real, good hardcore minimalism kind of stuff. Perfect for reading and hanging out. And if you liked Tim Hefker, I think you'll dig it.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was listening. I didn't pick this for my thing, but this week I can recommend this record. It's by Eric Hall, and it's called Solo 3, and he is kind of like doing minimalist compositions, but he's doing them like by himself, like I guess trying to layer everything, like play everything individually, like without clicks or anything. I don't know, it's sort of like an experiment, but he does these really gorgeous kind of versions of, there's a Glenn Branca track, a Charlemagne Palestine track, Laurie Spiegel, and Steve Reich's Music for a Large Ensemble. Again, sort of interesting to hear ensemble pieces, I guess, done just by one person, like sort of piecing it together the old-fashioned way. So yeah, if you like that, you might check that out. The thing I wanted to highlight was actually this record by a group or a person, I don't know, named Leif, L-E-I-F. I'll put this in the show notes, but the record is called Collide. This actually came out in December. And if you're weird like me, you kind of feel like as soon as it becomes 2026, I'm like, when I see that a record came out in 2025, I'm like, I don't want to listen to that. That's old. But I ended up kind of like falling in love with this anyway, because it was new to me. And it's sort of like, I don't know, it's got that kind of, how there's sometimes like krautrock that sounds like techno, but it's still in the krautrock world, that like cosmiche kind of like thing. It's very much that quality. And what's kind of interesting is that he is apparently performing, because there's like guitar and stuff on this. He is playing with like an old electric guitar from his childhood that is like damaged and kind of glitching out and not working right. It has kind of like a, like the Pole records that are like he dropped a mixer and now it's like kind of glitchy and, it's maybe got a little bit of that going on. But I just like, I don't know, it's really that sweet spot that I don't hear enough of, which is like half krautrock, half techno. So Collide by Leaf, really, really, really loving that.
Nice. I'll have to check that out. That Eric Hall record, I'll have to check too. I liked his, in 2023, he did Canto Ostinato. That was really good. I liked that record a lot. So next time, join us. We're going to do a bonus episode on Colma by Pan Sonic. So head over to Patreon, patreon.com/GONKCAST. After that, main episode on Autechre's XI, which of course will be free for everybody. You can share your thoughts via Patreon or email at gonkcastpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, help us out. Tell a friend, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media. All those things are at GONKCASTPod. And we'll see you next week.
See ya.